here we are. Totally Rewarding Chats. I have Belinda Roberts. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Sean. Nice to be here.
Great. All right. So, Belinda, for those who don't know, is the data and insights leader for US and Canada for Mercer. Which sounds very important
Oh,
and,
it's
and very
tremendously
nerdy.
important. It is kind of nerdy, I got to be honest with you. I'm a real data nerd and also a tech nerd, so it's right up my alley.
Okay. Well,
Compensation data and tech.
so that's your current job. So, give us the elevator pitch, and you can take however many floors you need in your elevator
Mhm.
to tell us how you got where you are, which obviously is a very American accent, by the way.
Absolutely. Grew up in New Zealand. Did my what they call the big OE, which is the overseas experience in my kind of early 20s. And so in the late 90s, I kind of fell into HR on accident. I got like a temporary job working in personnel at an investment bank. But I was working in, HR department, and so started doing compensation and benefits work, matching to surveys, things like that. And so in kind of the early 2000s, I moved to Australia and started working with Mercer, and running their financial suite of products in the Australian market. So I spent about 7 years there, and then I moved over to the US in 2007, to work on some of our proprietary compensation technology, old ePrism from back in the day. Some of the people who have been
Mhm.
around a while will remember that. And I came out to help on a couple of big projects that we needed help staffing for 6 months. So 6 months goes by, a year goes by, 2 years goes by, and then now 17 years later, I'm still here. But about 5 years ago, we moved out of that business, the compensation tech business, and an opportunity came up, and I moved over to lead the data and insights group. So my team make the surveys and the data products for the US and Canada. So all the compensation and policies and practices and all those products fall to my team. So some really great stuff there.
Awesome. I notice I think I only know like two or three people, and I've been around a while, who actually didn't fall into HR. So it's kind of funny. And you kind of are dating yourself when you say personnel department.
I
That's the
know.
way.
Well,
Uh,
it had been the admin department not long before that. So, ooh,
okay. Um,
wow.
so just to prove you're human, what do you do for fun outside of work now that you are not in New Zealand and, here?
Yeah. I have a 13-year-old, so not a lot. But when I do have available time, I like to oil paint. Um, I paint mainly portraiture, so that's kind of fun. And then we try to spend, quality family time while he's still open to talking to his parents. And we have a vintage 1971 Airstream. So it's my little piece of Americana, the shiny,
Yeah, yeah.
airplane like bubbles. Yeah, it's
We're
really
we're a
fun.
big trailer. We're a big trailer family. So I did not know that. So that's the other reason I'm doing this all the years. So was that like I don't know how long I've known you, 20 years,
Yeah.
and like I did not know that because actually
Yeah, we've
that's
towed it all the way out to like Utah and up to Maine, and we've had some great memories made.
oh,
So,
it's great. Well, we'll have to talk about working remoter at some point in time because I've
yeah,
done a
we
bunch
did
of
that
work
during the
in there.
pandemic.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. There were plenty of people camping. Now there's less. Thank goodness. So, um,
right.
So the reason I wanted to chat with you and kind of go through this is we talk a lot about getting data, at least in our software and our tools and where we're familiar. Everyone incorporates and puts data in. So which begs the question, what what makes a quality data source and how do you find quality data to actually start the benchmarking process, which then predicates the whole comp and comp planning and comp management system, but it's kind of underpins, in my opinion. If you don't have quality data, then the rest of it all just sits on kind of, to be honest, sits on a bed of lies for the rest of it. So how do
Yeah.
where do you start and what makes a quality data source?
I think foundationally, the job architecture is extremely important. Coverage of jobs across the market that actually reflect the market that you are, working and employing in. Um, just that robustness of the job architecture and making sure that's curated and maintained. We at Mercer have a fairly substantial team that is dedicated to maintaining our job architecture, and that supports it. It's a global architecture, so that is super important to keep it really relevant. I think when you start talking about the data itself, making sure you have like your peers are in the organization, maybe even your competitors. So understanding the participating companies, I think, is really important too. And competitors in your industry, yes, but also maybe competitors in like a local market. So those people who are competing for talent, not just your direct competitors in your industry. So those things are important. I think there's two things there, understanding what your peer group is, but also understanding if you need to know locally, if you've got hourly employees, for example, who that those local competitors are who are going to attract away your employees, and who you need to retain your employees against. Um, Good local coverage. I think that's important. Rural and urban, as much as you can. Some jobs it doesn't matter so much, but where there are jobs, oftentimes in the hourly space, having good local coverage, location coverage is really important, and being able to get down to those areas where people are coming into a plant or a manufacturing facility and things like that. Um, Data curation, validation, that's pretty important. Just like we spend a lot of time looking after our job architecture, we spend a lot of time validating with clients and curating the data to make sure, it makes sense year over year and there's not just sample spikes that are changing things wildly. That's something we really pride ourselves on, is trying to, make sure that we're talking to clients. Does this data set make sense? Is this the right LTI statistic you gave us? And, do you have the right revenue there so you can do proper cuts? So as much as we can in the time we have, we try to do as much validation and curation as possible. Honestly, I could talk for hours about the data quality, but there's lots of other things that go into it as well.
How does a company check though? Like, I mean, so there's the interesting thing, right? Because
Yeah.
as you look at every vendor that's out there collecting data and offers data, nobody says they have really bad data.
Yeah.
Nobody even says they have marginal data.
Yeah.
So how do you go if you imagine someone who
Yep.
hasn't been around as long, like how do I figure out the best sources of data and then to pile on questions to you? You've got survey data and the difference there between there's now a lot of other providers out there that are collecting data from other sources,
Yeah.
payroll, scraping, just
Yeah.
a myriad of places.
Yeah.
How do you weight and rank all those things
hmm
as you look at?
I think a good question to ask is, what's your methodology? Where did the data come from? Does it have a robust and defendable methodology for how the data set has been created or amalgamated? If there has been manipulation, to understand what's happened there. I mean, obviously, people aren't going to give away their uh, keys or their secret source, but understanding in general what has happened to the data and where it originally came from. I think that's super important. Uh, I think for people who are going out, there are so many data sets now. Just taking a kind of dispassionate lens. I'm not sure that price is the issue anymore from data perspective, but really just knowing where that data set comes from and understanding how you need to use it within your organization. If you're going to be called to ask to provide a peer group analysis for your executives, you might need to have a specific data set that you can do that for. But if you're looking to do something else and you need data quickly, a different data set might be fine. So understanding what your use case is. And I think we're going to talk probably at some point about real-time data. And that has great use cases for some things, but it's not always that helpful for everything if you're doing your basic comp analysis. So I think those things like methodology are super important. I also think that understanding the scope of the data, so from a total rewards perspective, does it go all the way through to long-term incentives if you need that, total direct? I mean, obviously base salary is table stakes, but how encompassing is the data? How much data is how are you going to get variable components and things like that if that's what you need to do measurements on variable? So I think those are all good questions for compensation people to look at when they're looking at data.
Have you talked to companies about real-time data? I mean, to me, it's interesting,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
my perspective, which may or people can take or leave. I think the payroll data um, is basically base pay. Arguably, could be better than survey data if you get it in the right place.
yeah,
There's some wonkiness when you talk about um, 1 year total cash. Is it in bonus or is it actual? Because it all gets treated as ordinary income on a payroll
yeah,
sometimes, depending on how it goes. So then you get to your point of validation, like,
yeah,
and what do you want to do? And then I think it gets a little bit tougher as you start talking about benefits, allowances, and LTIP. I think it
yeah,
gets really important when you get out to LTIP. Because how people cash, when they cash, like it's all different. How long they held, nobody's going to know that out of a
mm,
payroll system.
right.
So I don't know how you weight and rank those, knowing you're slightly biased
Yeah,
as you go through,
you
but
know,
see a lot of
as
clients.
a yeah, as a as an organization that, data products are a huge part of what we do, we would like to be more nimble in collecting and reporting back data. I don't think we'll ever get to real time. That's not something that we feel comfortable with. There's a lot of laws in place around anti-collusion and antitrust, around age of data, not forward looking. We want to stay on the right side of the Department of Justice, and we want to make sure we keep our clients safe as well.
Oh, well, let
So,
me be clear. When I mean real time, I
mhm,
guess let me be clear. So if you
yeah,
want to ride the 90-day window, whatever it is, but kind of a rolling maybe
yeah,
evergreen is a better term than
yeah,
real time. So real time probably does have that negative, like
yeah,
payroll happened yesterday and now I'm going to
yeah,
upload my numbers and they're going to change 3 days across. No, to me, it's more of an evergreen
yeah,
piece, I guess, real time being in that near
yeah.
time. Maybe it should be termed near time.
Right
Uh,
time, we like to say.
oh, okay. I'll take that.
Yeah. So right time gives us the opportunity to have more of a subscribing type of a model and still stay safe within the bounds of the restrictions. So that is actually something we're looking to do. We've got some products that are already based on that rolling collection and they publish quarterly. Our Comptrix product, we would ideally like to move a lot more of our database towards that, um, without making our clients give us data more often, because
Yeah.
that's something we don't want to ask and they don't want to do, which totally makes sense. It's a ton of work to participate in a survey. So those are all areas we see a lot of value in, is getting more regular data to our clients. And it's a lot of where we're spending time focused on our CapEx funding and spend, is to try to solve for that problem, and get more regular data. Um, I do think that I think it's valuable, the information you could get from a payroll provider. I think we just have to be a little cautious about the ability of a comp department and comp structures to be able to handle real time data or right time data. It's hard enough to do a once a year structure review. I think there's a lot of value with hiring and other hot jobs to understand, how things are moving really quickly. But in general, I think it's a more limited use case than that. I still think the majority of comp teams can only really handle reviewing their data once a year en masse, except for those, anomalies where they're hiring in the hot jobs. So I absolutely want to go that way. I think we need to go that way. Um, but I think there's some caution around how much you can actually use right time or real time data.
So you mentioned a couple of those, but with companies you've seen struggling to get quality data, right? Because I think,
Mhm.
I always kind of term it, blue skies, rainbows, and unicorns version of we've got the right data and all the right jobs and all the right things and everything lines up and I can submit on my data and
Yeah.
my architecture lines up to your architecture thing. But if you had to name a couple of the biggest hurdles of where companies struggle, kind of getting and maximizing quality data, what would those be?
Probably knowledge of the data world. Small to mid-sized businesses, they've often not heard of Mercer and our traditional competitors. And there is a lot of other options out there. I'm not saying any of the options are bad. I think all data is good. It's total data democracy. And I think for some of those data sets, it's good enough for a lot of organizations. I think as organizations get bigger and bigger, they need a more specificity in what they are needing. They get more specialized roles, and oftentimes that's when they start to need to get into a peer group analysis or really hone in on an industry specific job. So I think it's almost related to size of the organization. As they come into the market, they start to understand that they need data in general, and maybe don't have any comp team, don't have a lot of comp specialty. And so they're using it in a fairly limited way in the beginning. And as they kind of move through and they start using compensation data more and more, then the appetite for a more, what I would call highly curated data set, which would be kind of like a survey from a Mercer, that's when that starts to become a lot more useful to them. But sometimes that's overwhelming for a smaller company too, right? So our job architecture is, over 30,000 jobs. And
Right.
so
Well, that's what I was going to
it's a
say, whether
lot.
you're at Mercer's IPE or Hay Points or something like
Yeah.
that, just
Yeah.
reading the instructions when you've got, 500 people, you're like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do this. But do
Yeah.
you think, okay, yeah, because to me, I think the hardest place for people is, I think in the hundreds, again, by size, I agree with you, like by size. In the hundreds, good enough. Like,
Yeah.
they're really doing a gut check. They don't have
Yeah.
structure. They got one or two people. I don't have to worry about stuff. In the
Yeah.
thousands, they've got comp teams that can kind of really dig
Hmm.
in. But how do these companies that are big enough to have one comp person, maybe, or maybe a
Yeah.
comp and Ben, and, I'm an American, so I'll tell you benefits then probably is, three-quarters of your time or more
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we just make it difficult in the US for benefits
Yeah.
people. Um, so it becomes, I think, how tech can and how we can
Hmm.
overcome the hurdle, whether it's tech or
Yeah.
manual or instructions to allow them to match.
Yeah.
Like, do I have an accountant one or a four? I have an accountant. So I can't
Mhm.
even rank order my people. I've got an accountant. I can't tell
Yeah.
if they're one or a four or a three, which is
Right.
actually an accountant 24 over at Hay Group and a
Mhm.
something else somewhere else. And how do I
Right.
compare?
Right. Yeah, you mentioned two things. I think technology is a real savior for those sort of small to mid-sized clients who aren't really uh, big enough to have a large, complex comp team who are going to deal with a big compensation management tool and load their couple of hundred global surveys in there. Having good data baked into those is really helpful. It takes away all of that need to be managing a survey library and trying to get it into your tool and all of the things that you have to do to get to a place where you can use the data. But also the job matching piece of it. And we are spending a lot of time right now on building out AI to help um, us and our clients match to our taxonomy, our architecture, but also others. So we really hope that that can sort of save a lot of that very transactional and foundational work when matching to a data product or a data survey. Because for us, that's really a lot. It's a huge time suck. Um, it's just massive, and really, they spend so much time matching that they don't have time to do analytics. So those are the kind of things that I think recommending people get their data via a technology product if they're smaller, especially. I mean, obviously, the bigger they get, they need a technology product. But yeah, that's really helpful. And then I think we can come to market with some kind of AI driven job matching. That would
I
be
think that's going to be the first and
fantastic.
foremost place. not to
Hmm.
give Amazon no props, but anything else. But companies like you matched like
Yeah.
this for this role. And
Yeah.
so you're like, okay, that kind of makes sense, or it's more important to me, I'll move it up or down. But
Yeah.
we kind of in comp planning when we give recommendations call it an anchor point. But to me, it's kind of like of all 30,000 jobs I can
Mm.
match, give me five, and this is the one we think is right to start. That's so, that's not nearly
Yeah.
as overwhelming as go find a job function family and then grade a job.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's going to be I think that's going to be huge. I think the other thing personally with tech is going to be super cool. You guys have all the history over the years, so even people with near term or right time data or
Hmm.
recent data, real time data, it's fairly recent with that
Hmm.
piece, and so being able to
Yeah.
catch hiccups and kind of be able to map out what might be a hiccup and what traditionally does happen actually. So as you're hiring up the curve, if
Yeah.
you hire at the top, it's going to take you 4 years to get out from under that when supply and demand levels out. If you hire at 75%, those people stay. Like I
Yeah.
think that stuff, because you have the survey providers also have the, incumbent over year, which is
Yeah.
super cool data.
Yeah, and actually, that's exactly what happened over the last couple of years with the hot labor market. Is people just hired in what they needed to hire at, and now they have these huge compression issues that they're still trying to dig out of, where they've got people getting paid more than their manager and things like that. So technology hopefully will get more sophisticated to be able to allow for those types of analytics. And right now, a lot of the time, it's more just benchmarking and uh, we need to make benchmarking more automated so we can move on to more analytical and insights generation.
Well, I think it's the data insights, but I still think it's the data submission. You put the data
Hmm.
in,
Yep.
and then, and actually where you match and then recommended peer cuts. To your point, an hourly person at, working at a big box store is just as likely to go to a warehouse or a restaurant for $1 an hour as anywhere else, right? And you can
Yeah.
start to do that matching and watch across and let them match and suggest peer groups as
Yeah.
well, and
Yeah.
where they should and should not have peer groups.
Yeah. And actually, that's a really great point. That whole concept of a moving with the hourly world, we have a data product that allows you to kind of look at all of the hourly data we have, which is substantial. It's in the 8 to 9 million records range, and say, I want to price a labor pool versus a job. So we had like companies saying to us, I got to price a job in my laundry. I'm a hotel on one side of the street, but I'm competing for talent with the hospital across the road for laundry workers. And really, it's not laundry workers, it's someone who's willing to do that job at that location in a not overly skilled way. You learn everything on the job. You want to work in a warm environment with air conditioning, and that's the job profile. So our tool sort of lets you say, give me all the data for all of the jobs with this skill set who work in this market, and it can be hyper local, from like a zip code perspective, and say, tell me how much they get paid, and not tell me how much a laundry worker gets at hotels in the city. So it's really a different way to look at it. It's kind of like taking a step back and saying the hourly pay strategy is a little different to the salaried pay strategy a lot of the time.
Take that one step further. So I use the example of accountants all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And company size, because a lot of companies will say, well, I have to benchmark against my company. I'm 100, 150 people. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. Then you think you're paying it, 70% comp ratio, right?
Yeah.
And you're losing everybody. So you think the problem is something to do with your environment, but when you benchmark against your whole area for an accountant, somebody who's
Yeah.
portable until they get to a certain level and, create demand dollars for certain skills in that industry, you're like, actually, in the market, I'm paying 40. And so I'm not as cool as I thought.
Right.
This is why I'm losing problem because then they can't work the right problem without
Right.
if they choose the wrong data set and look at that data the wrong way, they start to functionally try to solve the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that raises a really good point. Like, as we move on through the next 3 to 5 years, I really think the data landscape is going to become a lot more complex. Like, we're creating products that have base through LTI, total direct, but we're going to need to understand demand data, supply data, and how that correlates to compensation. How much do gig workers get paid in that, in that job, maybe in that location? Like there's so many other lenses that we need to apply to the compensation data now to say what's a real competitive index. To your point, like you might be paying at the market ratio of 100 or 1 or whatever. But if there's high demand for that job in that market or that specific job, and you're having a really hard time filling, maybe you're not at 100%, right? Like maybe you're at 70 or 80 and you need to pay a premium to offset the demand side of things. So we're trying to think through.
Real-time data is interesting, right? Because
Mhm.
you've got this long window of data that you have that's collected and very highly curated, and then you've
Yeah.
got this data that you can, I mean, we term it interpolation, but you can start to figure out actually, that's a good buoy number, but I've got a little bit more of a supply and demand lens on
Mhm.
what's happening right now. Doesn't mean I need to move, I just need to adjust the other number. Don't get married to
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. 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 I think that's kind of where we see the data landscape heading is ever growing complexity of data sources and data inputs. And hopefully the technology will keep up with that.
Well, and
Uh,
I also think consumers, whatever you want to call them, employees,
yeah.
job seekers, everyone's getting smarter. So, because the data is more readily available. And so things like, not, what are my total rewards for the year? They're starting to, I think, get better, especially where the employment market is balance-ish,
Mhm.
can argue, the numbers, but it
Yeah.
balance-ish that, I might take less money here because the benefits are a lot more. And what is that? And so the total looking at understanding your total rewards package, and obviously I
Yeah.
come from the benefits background, so I'm always a little biased. But I think consumers, if you want to call them that, people, job seekers, employees, have gotten significantly smarter about the value of what they're getting in their benefits. And so companies have to start looking at that. You can't be good enough and be like, check the box anymore. They're doing the math now.
Yeah, yeah. And even so far as to say the personalization of total rewards, I think
Yeah.
is going to happen whether companies want to do it or not. I think they should try to do it. I think it would be very valuable for their attraction and retention. Um,
For equity too. It'll be important.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
what'll make that really hard, I think, is the TPAs, the third party administrators, and all the people on the Ben side
hmm,
to be able to pick and choose and move stuff around and whatever. There's
yeah,
going to have to be, and I think tech's moving so fast. I agree with you.
yeah,
And once there's
yeah,
a little bit of a critical mass, everyone will kind of jump that way. Because I think from an equity standpoint, how much cooler does it get?
yeah,
You get $80,000. Everyone in this role gets $80,000. How you spend your $80,000 is a you problem.
yeah,
Whether you want to use it in benefits or cash or
yeah,
whatever it is, that's actually a pretty cool
yeah,
premise. You guys will be able to watch how that kind of goes because the numbers will bounce around for all the incumbents, but the
yeah.
jobs at that company will all pay the same. That would be like really cool to see.
Yeah, and it's super interesting to watch the pay transparency laws roll out too,
Yeah.
and watch organizations kind of get on that whole underlying communication around their pay strategy bandwagon, right? So it, not only employees can see how much the pay ranges for their jobs that's being posted on the internet, but job applicants, candidates can too. And so there's still a huge disconnect between what they see posted online and the reality of what makes up that range and how does that apply to them.
Yeah, there's no
So,
guidelines there yet on it, which I think is really
mhm,
interesting. You got companies who are like, I'm just going to put it out there because I have to. You got,
yeah,
and then you got others who are like, actually, think about it. If I'm in a high demand region, I'll do my total comp package.
yeah,
I might have to explain that to some angry employees, but actually, I just need butts in chairs.
yeah,
And so I'm going to add it
yeah,
together and I'll deal with that issue of that's not base pay when they show up because I can't interview them if they don't show up.
right,
Um, versus the other one, do I make it actually lower
right,
and try to hire someone more junior and make everyone feel good about themselves that in the current role that they're like, oh
yeah,
crap, actually the market outside is this way. It's an interesting thing from a, oh crap, we have to do this to how do I position it? What can I do with it? How do I communicate it thing? And, it didn't take long for people to start thinking strategically about what that is.
mm, yeah, I agree.
It's always, it's comp like, because I came from talent acquisition, comp, like a lot of things, you're like, how hard can comp be? And how hard can comp and bend data be? When I got into that space, and it was like, how hard can it be, right? I get paid. Like, I understand a paycheck. And then you realize, like, holy crap, it's complicated. And then, of course, it's made more complicated because you got to have all the different humans that are involved in it in an organization. And then you add the external labor market that's putting pressure, and you don't have as much control on that. So I mean, like you, I fell into HR, or as this guy, Paul Ryman at Novo Insights is who I heard it from last, but he was like, you don't choose comp chooses you.
I think so.
Yeah. And very few people basically get out of high school and go, you know what I want to do? I want to be a comp professional or comp and ben professional. But somehow they get into it. And then I think people just get jammed hooked on it like you. You're like, this is cool stuff.
Yeah. I no, I mean, it wasn't even a thing actually when I joined into the HR department, which personnel, I guess. When I moved out to Australia in the early 2000s, the whole concept of being a compensation and benefits analyst was relatively new. And so, I'm really dating myself there, but that is evolved very steadily over the years. And I feel like we've just hit like a huge ramp up. Like it's going to get a lot more sophisticated, a lot more quickly, complex and sophisticated. But somehow it also needs to be simpler.
Well, but the term I use a lot, and people have heard me say it, like I believe humans are highly statistically predictable, but individually amazingly unique. And so I don't think like comp teams are going to have to be more strategic, and you can get more
Yeah.
tech and get a lot more science behind it. But the art of how they use that to drive their business and align to their business is going to get more complex as,
Yeah.
I call them consumers, but the end users, you know, get more data as the senior people in the board get more informed,
Yeah.
like comp becomes. So I think it's tech is not going to keep up with the demands of it, and it's more than half of the spend at most companies. Like you can't hide from it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And, we have good analytics about the malalignment between budgeting for merit and actually what gets spent. And that
Yeah,
causes a lot of damage to organizations because it's a lot of money if you miss by 1.5%,
it's yes, yeah,
which has been trending the last year or two.
yeah.
Uh,
Especially low margin businesses, they just can't
yeah.
afford. When you've got a 5%
Mhm.
margin business and you miss by a point,
Yeah.
like that's a big deal.
And another reason why you need good comp data, because you need to
That's
know how
true.
much you need to pay. Because if you don't, then you're going to have a attraction and retention problem, and you're going to have that overspend at the end of the year. So,
Penny
yeah,
wise and pound foolish, right?
right, exactly.
The question I always ask near the end, it doesn't have to be data, but if you could auto magically, a highly technical term, auto
Mm.
magically solve one thing in HR tomorrow, what would it be?
Uh, well, I'm going to stick in the comp world because that's my jam, but also technology. It's nothing new than what I haven't already talked about. I'd take the friction out of the process. Whether it be creating the data products, like the ingesting data from clients or systems, I'd make that friction free. I'd also make it friction free to get for them to consume the data. Direct feeds into whatever systems. And honestly, if anyone wants to come and talk to me from a comp tech company about how I would design some of the systems to use the data, I think that's where I would add the improvements to take that effort and foundational functional work off of the comp people so they can do all the things you talked about, that do more sophisticated analytics and spend more time actually analyzing the results versus preparing the system to do benchmarks, right? So that's what if I automatically could change something, that would be the three kind of key areas I'd focus on, reducing friction in and out, and then making the systems do most of the work for the client, the heavy
That's,
lifting.
that's so nerdily practical,
I know.
but that's awesome.
Oh,
And I
that and
agree.
world peace.
Obviously, we think analytics is where it's going to be, and being able to basically maximize spend, right? Which they use analytics everywhere else, and they create time for that. And
Yeah,
so I totally agree. Like, can we get more time for people to do it?
yeah,
And I think analytics, even with machine learning and AI, every company's different. So you're going to have to be able to figure out use tech to get to some general point, but how do I tweak those for my business to work in my area, for my industry, for my everything,
Yeah.
is going to be super unique.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more.
So this has been great. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on. We will have, when we get this out, Belinda's contact information will be around. We'll tag her when it's posted. You heard it. She is happy to talk with people about data. She's easy to, if you say you want to talk about data.
You
She's
can't
ready.
stop.
Yeah, that might be. You might want to limit the calling, which is awesome though. Like talking to providers of data, people who are just so excited about it, you just know, there's solid data back there because
Yeah.
it's keeps you up at night, which is super cool.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think we're heading into an exciting time in the next 5 years. So I'm excited.
awesome. Well, thanks so much. And for those others, we'll see you the next time.
Thanks for having me.